Y'all ready to do this?
Yo, what's up, guys? What's up, man?
Boys are in effect. Yeah, and it's about time. Yo, let's rip this up. Boys the men. Boys the men. Boys the men.
Skip the beat, nah. While cooling on South Street, jet black bands, plenty of friends,
And all the Philly steaks you can eat.
make it.
Yo, these four new jacks is real smooth on the harmony tip. Nate, Mike, Sean, the one, you know the mentality. Keep flipping the gift.
The spotlight is on us now. Watch us do this. Live and direct from Philly town. Rapping, hyping, we can get down. We are ready to roll, so now the world will know that we love.
Back in school, we used to dream about this every day. Could it really happen? Or do dreams just fade away? Then we started singing and dancing, it sounds good. So we started a group and here we are, kicking it just for you. Now check this out, one day back in Philly, four guys wanted to sing. They came up to me, I said, well, what's your name? Hey, you know what I'm saying? And then I said, all right, fellas, well, let me see what you can do. And then a smile when they won here said, yo, Mike, check this out. See if this one moves.
ABC, BBD.
Say, come with me and let's have no delay. We're going down east to Philadelphia. Gonna dig that Quaker City boogie woogie. First go down Broad, then turn out Walnut Street. Just one short block, then turn up 15th Street. Take your earmuffs off and dig that jivey beat. Philadelphia boogie, you sound swell to me. Philadelphia boogie, you do things to me. Ain't nothing like it from here to Tennessee. Philadelphia boogie woogie. Give us a large order, please. Gee, Philadelphia boogie. Philadelphia boogie. Philadelphia boogie. Let her rip, let her rip, let her rip. knocked out, let's bring him back alive. Fly, 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 Billy Boogie. Fly, 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 Billy Boogie. Fly, 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 Billy Boogie. Philadelphia, boogie woogie.
Drums, please.
Here it is, a groove slightly transformed. Just a bit of a break from the norm. Just a little something to break the monotony of all that hardcore dance that has gotten to be a little bit out of control. It's cool to dance, but what about a groove that soothes and moves romance? Give me a soft, subtle mix, and if it ain't broke, then don't try to fix it. And think of the summers of the past. Adjust the bass and let the alpine blast. Pop in my CD and let me run a rhyme and put your car on cruise and lay back, cause it's summertime. Out and it's sort of a buzz, but back then I didn't really know what it was. But now I see what happened is the way that people respond to summer madness. The weather is hot and girls are dressing less and checking out the fellas to tell them who's best. Riding around in your Jeep or your Benzos, or in your Nissan sitting on Lorenzo's. Back in Philly we be out in the park. A place called the Plateau is where everybody go. Guys out hunting and girls doing likewise. Honking at the honey in front of you with the light eyes. She turn around and see what you beeping at. It's like the summer's a natural aphrodisiac. And with a pen and pad I compose this rhyme to hit you and to get you equipped for the summertime. Short set. Yeah, I got on sneaks, but I need a new pair. Cause basketball courts in the summer got girls there. The temperature's about 88. Hop in the water plug, just for old time's sake. Break to your crib, change your clothes once more. Cause you're invited to a barbecue to start at 4. Sitting with your friends, y'all reminisce about the days growing up and the first person you kiss. And as I think back, makes me wonder how the smell from a grill can spark off nostalgia. All the kids playing out front, little boys messing around, but the girls playing double dutch. While the DJ spinning a tune as the old folks dance at your family reunion. Then 6 o'clock rolls around. You just finished wiping your car down. It's time to cruise, so you go to the summertime hangout. It looks like a car show. Everybody come looking real fine, fresh from the barbershop, applauding the beauty of happiness. And this is the Fresh Prince's new definition of summer madness.
Those lights are bad. Ooh. There they are, finally.
So who's like the master? I am. You are. So why don't you do this? Here's a suggestion. Yes. Free, no charge. No charge. I don't need a contract. Runs the visa last night. Yes. So why don't you ask everybody to fill these two sections up front? This is very spread out.
Ready, Gordon?
Yeah, I'm good. Just names, I'm trying not to.
Okay, we're about to get started. If I could ask everyone to come up closer to the front and maybe to the middle two sections, please. That'll give you a good seat for the seed lecture. So welcome to Philadelphia for Geo Congress 2019. My name's Bob Gilbert. I'm on the Board of Governors for the Geo Institute. And one of the primary missions for the Geo Institute is to advance our profession. And the Academy of Geoprofessionals is one.
Competency and mastery, and accept the ASCE Code of Ethics. And then obviously it costs some money to organize this, this operation, so that is $300 with the application and covers the first year's certification. And after that, it's an annual fee of $150. Now, there's an oral exam required, and if you defended a master's, it's the similar kind of thing. Or if you have defended a PhD, similar. Before panel or board certified geotechnical engineers. It's 30 minutes. It's a 30-minute presentation by the applicant, and typically it would be related to a project that they managed, and so they should be certainly familiar with it. Plus, they would defend their application. And this is held normally via video conferencing, so there's not a lot of travel involved. Shouldn't be a problem. And it may be waived by the Board of Trustees depending on the experience of the individual. And if you'd like more information, there should be a slide here. Anyway, Brian Seen, who is the ASCE person who works with AGP, or myself, you can contact either one of those. Now, what I want to do is have Gordon introduce each of the individuals who we're going to recognize, and Alan will give them their certificate, and we'll go forward from that point, and thank you very much.
Well, good evening, and I get to do the fun part. You all just listen to Ray give you the sales pitch. So I'm very happy to be here this evening to introduce our latest group of individuals being presented with the certification of DGE. And so we'll go through individually, and each individual, if you don't mind, when I call your name out, I'll give a little background, but as I'm doing that, walk up to through the stage here. And again, Alan will give you your certificate, and then there'll be a photograph, I think, somewhere. Yes, okay. So our first one is, and I apologize in advance for butchering some of these names, but I will try. Kofi Archchumpo. And hopefully I got that. He was trying to instruct me how to say it earlier. Anyways, Kofi's with KCI Technologies in Maryland. He has 32 years of experience. His experience is in subsurface investigation, in situ testing, ground improvements, deep foundations, load testing for highways, railways, infrastructures, dams, and levees. So give me applause for Mr. Archchumpo. The next individual is Kawasi Badu Tunubawa. Again, I'm sorry about that. Is Kawasi here? Looks like Kawasi wasn't able to join us this evening, but he's with Geosyntech Consultants in Florida. He has 40 years of experience in maintenance, dredging management, and geotechnical investigations, design, construction, and mostly associated with dredging, dike raising, shore protection. Very well qualified individual. The next one is Mr. Derek Dossenbrock. And Mr. Dossenbrock's with the Minnesota Department of Transportation in Minneapolis. They don't ever get cold up there, I don't think, do they? So he has 20 years experience in subsurface investigation, geophysics, laboratory testing, soil and rocks, mechanics, quality assurance, and project management. Give an applause for him, please. The next one is Mr. Ricardo Abro. And Ricardo, if you'll join us. Ricardo is from Fourier and the Abro Associates in New Orleans. He has 25 years of experience in geotechnical engineering and design of environmental and geotechnical structures, water resources, as well as hydrogeology. And a variety of site analysis and construction oversight. Our next individual is Gerard Green. I got that one right. He's with Langen Engineering and Farmington, New Jersey, 16 years of experience in site characterization, foundation design, excavations, retaining structures, geotech analysis, and project management. So give us applause for him, please. Next up is Jed Greenwood. He's with Bar Engineering out of Minneatrista, Minnesota. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. He has 14 years of experience in projects ranging from design of levees, flood walls, dams, large slope stabilization projects, and he does a lot of numerical modeling, finite difference modeling, finite elements. So may applause for him, please. Next up is Mr. Aaron Grosser. He's also with Bar Engineering, and he's in Minneapolis. He's 22 years of experience in project management and geotechnical design services related to levees, embankments, and earth dams, mine tailings, earth retention structures. Thank you, Mr. Grosser. Next up is Miss Ingrid Howard. She's with the Corps of Engineers out of Martinsburg, West Virginia. She has 23 years of experience, and she has in geotechnical engineering. She's worked overseas on many projects throughout the Mideast. She is a very accomplished engineer with the Corps. Next is Mr. Kuhn Lee. He's with GZA Environmental out of New York. He has 19 years of experience with seismic design, finite element analysis, and he's looked at in GZA as the sort of the go-to guy for a number of these design services and estimated costing and things like that. So, Mr. Lee. Next is Zaid Mad. Is Mr. Mad here? Oh, there he is. Okay, I'm sorry. Mr. Mad, he's with Geotechnical Services Incorporated, Geotechnical Engineering Services out of Elmsford, New York. He's got 25 years of experience in geotech engineering, expert witness, subsurface investigation, foundation remediation, ground improvement, grouting, and a number of other things. Next is Mr. Nevin Mostovic. Did I say that correctly? Mostovic, okay. He's with Geologic Associates in Huntington Beach, California, with 25 years of experience. He is recognized internationally as a tremendous geotechnical engineer in the areas of earthquake engineering, geoenvironmental engineering, and numerical modeling. And finally, we have Robert McMichael of Madsen, Kepnepers and Associates in Arizona. He has 32 years of experience on a wide variety of projects, including feasibility and planning, due diligence investigations, environmental remediation, design phase, geotech subjects, and construction monitoring. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not the last ones. I had a page break here in my notes here. Next one is Mr. Sam Sternberg. And Mr. Sternberg's with Dan Brown and Associates out of Alabama. He has 16 years of experience in project management, engineering design, and load testing. He has designed and managed bridge support structures, soil remediation, retaining walls, and a number of familiar geotechnical projects. And I think this is finally Mr. Aditi Surar, if I said that correctly, mostly. Yes. Oh, I'm very sorry. Sorry. Yep. He is with Genesis in Texas. 23 years of experience in foundation design and analysis of deep water subsurface structures or subsea structures, fixed offshore platforms, pipelines, risers. So he's our offshore geotechnical engineer. So if you don't mind clapping one more time for everybody who received it. So, you want to say final words?
Okay. Bob Gilbert, are you next or what? Oh, well, I close it, he says. Okay, well, I think Gordon already closed it, but I do appreciate you coming very much. This is a very important part of geotechnical engineering, and again, congratulations to all the folks we recognized.
We just planned out. That's Moses. That's the guy Could we have all the diplomates come over here to the right side of the stage for a group photo?
say the shower stall is leaking and the ceiling's falling in, and I'm getting 20 bills to every letter. Oh, got to move myself out to the country. Looking down for where that place is all, but I'm gonna spend another fall in Philadelphia. I'm gonna spend another fall in Philadelphia. Say, roll big band of you speed up on Johnny. Everybody's getting richer, selling that dough. Say the stolen banks are gathering by the thousand, along with 7 million people without a hope. Face the fact that think of being backed up against the wall. I'm gonna spend another
We're getting there. Can everybody start to take a seat so we can get started?
So we're going to get started. Good afternoon. My name is Beth Gross, and I'm the president of the GI. So I'd like to invite you or welcome you to the 2019 GEO Congress. This is also the 8th International Conference on Case Histories in Geotechnical Engineering. The board of the GI is very excited about this conference. We've had 1,300 people pre-register for the conference, so 1,300 participants with over 375 students. And we expect there will be a number of people that also register on site, so we should have over 1,500 attendees. We also have one of our biggest exhibit halls ever. Actually, it is the biggest exhibit hall ever. We have over 110 exhibitors. So we would like you to use this opportunity to meet suppliers of products and services, including contractors and consultants in the exhibit hall tonight. So with this, I want to bring up the co-organizers of this conference to give you the real Philadelphia welcome. And that's Alan Cadden of Schnabel Engineering and Scott Olson of University of Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And welcome, everybody, to GEO Congress 2019 in the city of brotherly love, and also this fine Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in case you weren't quite sure where you are. I do understand many people aren't quite sure which end of the convention center we're supposed to be at, but you found us, so thank you for joining us here. This is actually the first GEO Congress that we've ever had in the Northeast. So hopefully after this one, everybody will remember what a great time they've had, and we'll have a few more up here in the future. But this week, we're all gathered in the city with limitless culture, culinary experiences, and historical attractions. And I hope you get an opportunity to take advantage of some of that just outside our doors here. So please enjoy your time with old friends, new colleagues, visit our city, and we hope to pick up some of the insight from the case histories you're going to hear in the next 3 days. So, Scott, you want to welcome everybody?
I want to second the welcome from Alan, and thank you all for joining us here. The vision for this was Professor Prakash 35 years ago, indicating to us the history that we get, the learning that we can do from case histories, and he started these case histories conferences. So we're really excited as part of the GI to take over this series of conferences. We've got, as Beth mentioned, 1,300 pre-registered people here. We have about 400 papers, 6 panel sessions, 4 award lectures, the H. Bolton Seed, the Carl Terzaghi, the Robert Kerner, the Ralph B. Peck. We have 2 special sessions, one dedicated to honoring Professor Prakash and his legacy, and then a case histories session, especially honoring Professor Peck. We couldn't do this without all the help that we've gotten from our sponsors and our exhibitors, so please keep your eyes open for the monitors, the boards, the logos. You'll find information about these folks everywhere throughout here. And we're excited to bring you something new at this conference. I like to call it the test pits, but it's our Geo Pits, our powerful, informative talks that you'll learn about more tomorrow. I'd like to thank our colleagues on the committee, and here I've got to use my notes to remember all the names. Chris Meehan, Sanjeev Kumar, Jared Green, Stacy Kuleza, Miguel Pando, Joe Coe, Archie Filschel, Jay McKelvey, and I'd also like to thank our partners at the GI and the staff there, Brad, Lucy, Caitlin, Tatiana, Elizabeth, Drew, and please say thank you to them. They're the ones who really made this possible. We're just the idea guys up here. So, hand it back over to Alan.
Okay, just a couple last comments on the activities. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we're going to start the student competitions in the exhibit hall just upstairs. You'll find out where that is after you go to the reception this evening and find the great event up in that area. But one of the things, if you didn't get a chance before the conference to support the student activities, please feel free to go by the ASCE booth in the center there. Brad so graciously provided an iPad there with a square little device on it that you can slide your credit card through, and the money goes directly to the student activities for future events. So Please keep that in mind as you're walking by the ASCE booth. So with that, I think that's the main introductory comments. I would like at this moment to introduce Jean-Louis Briaud. Jean-Louis is on our ASCE Board of Directors, and he's a candidate for the President-elect. He's a professor at Texas A&M and a former president of ISSMGE. So welcome, Jean-Louis.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, President Gross. I want to thank also the GI board and thank all the GI members for the fantastic work that you're doing. I really appreciate that as a member of the GI and a member of ASCE. So I'm a candidate for president of ASCE, and in a nutshell, I would appreciate your vote. In case you don't know much about me, I was born, raised, educated in France. I got my master's, my PhD in Canada. I then got a job at Texas A&M University in 1978, and where I am now a distinguished professor. I'm a distinguished member of ASCE. I joined ASCE in 1979, and it's really my very broad family. I want to help, and that's one of the reasons why I'm a candidate for president of the American Society of Civil Engineers. I've contributed at the regional level. I've contributed at the institute level. I have won my share of awards. I've traveled extensively. In terms of vision, I have a 10-step list, and step 1, 2, and 3 are to listen, and listen to the members. So I hope that the next two days that I will be here, you will come to me and tell me what you think we should do to improve ASCE in case I get elected. Then I would like to get the young members more involved in the affairs of the society. For one thing, I'm in favor of the students being allowed to vote. I also want to take a critical look at the budget. ASCE is a $15 million a year budget operation, and it's being stressed right now, and we need to pay attention to this. I also would like to be sure that we recognize and we appreciate I estimate 5,000 volunteers that contribute to the big engine of ASCE. ASCE has 250 staff members in Reston and about 5,000 volunteers out of 150,000 members. And then in the end, I would like to develop a sense of family among all of us so that no member asks, what's in it for me, but how can I help? Again, there are 150,000 members in ASCE. 75,000 members are eligible to vote. About 7,000 members vote typically. The vote is in May. ASCE members will receive an email prompting you to vote online. And so if you think of 7,000 votes typically, the Geo Institute has about 12,000 members. So if you all vote for me, I'll be a very happy man. Now I would like to bring in Patrick Fox, and Pat is going to tell us about the journal, very important.
Thank you, Jean-Louis. And I can say that the Board of Governors are completely behind your candidacy, and we look forward to your presidency. So I'm here, actually not here to talk about the journal. I'm here to introduce the person who's going to talk about the journal. 4 years ago, I handed off the baton for the Journal of Geotechnical and Geoenvironmental Engineering to the next chief editor. And I'm very proud to say, glad to say, that the journal has only gone higher and higher since that time. And the acceptance rate has decreased, the number of submissions has increased, the reputation of the journal has increased, and it's now, I believe, the leading journal in ASCE. And so it's made a meteoric rise, actually, from the times, let's say, going back to David Daniel in the turn of the century. Craig Benson was in there, John Stewart, myself, and so forth. Anyway, I'll let him give the full story, but I'd like to bring up to the podium, we have something for Mo Gabber. Dr. Mo Gabber from North Carolina State University. So Mo, on behalf of the Board of Governors, we'd like to present this certificate of appreciation for all the excellent work. Here, actually, better turn this way, huh? All the excellent work as leading our highly regarded Journal of Geotechnical and Geoenvironmental Engineering.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mo.
That. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pat. And Jean-Louis, you have my vote. We all know there'll be no collusion in that case, right? And congratulations, Alan, for the seed lecture. It is my honor to have served as the editor-in-chief of the journal. Today is my last day, and there will be leadership transition tomorrow. I'm not quite sure. Okay, try this. Yeah. So the journal is, as editors are myself as EIC, and then Scott Brandenburg, John McCartney, Rod Salgado, and Tim Stark. It's your journal. The journal has achieved what Pat described only because of you, as authors, as reviewers, as associate editors, and of course the editors and so forth. So really I had nothing to do with it other than just trying to serve and do my best as you know, one in many people. If we look at the journal matrix, it is the highest circulation of all geotechnical journals. It is certainly the largest of ASCE. In 2018, we had 833 submissions. That's about 5% compared to 2017. And our review times are reasonable. They're not necessarily the best in the industry, but certainly they're improving with years. If we look at the metrics, and I'm not really thinking that this is what's directing us or how we operate. We, as Pat said one day, a good paper that should be published, will be published, and those that needs a little bit improvement should be helped through the process. And this is indeed the philosophy that we have followed in the past 4 years. I know Pat followed the same thing. Indeed, the impact factor, or 2-year impact factor, is the highest of all ASCE journals, and as a matter of fact, is the highest of all peer geotechnical journals. So you can, of course, know all of them better than I am, but that's something that, a fact right now. It may not be the same in the future, but it just happened this way. Our acceptance rate is 15%, but we publish on the average about 155 papers per year. So that did not change, even though acceptance rate went down. If we look at the appointments, we have one retirement in 2018, John Rice. And I don't know if John is here, but we have a certificate of appreciation for him for the service he has provided. John from Utah State University. And we have appointed 5 new editors, and you can see the names and their affiliation. These are leaders in their field, and indeed our associate editors are the gatekeepers of the journal. So the good quality work, timely reviews, and the meaningful feedback to the authors come from our associate editors. Every year, the editors decide on an award, and the award go to an associate editor who provide timely reviews, who provide meaningful feedback to the authors, and consistently do that, take a large number of papers upon themselves. So we're very proud to name the Associate Editor of the Year. We had 2 that were very close to each other who could not actually come up with just one. So for this year, we have Professor Monica Prezzi from Purdue as Associate Editor of the Year. We also have Professor Mark Cassidy from University of Western Australia as Associate Editor of the Year. I'm not sure if Monica is here, but we have a certificate of appreciation for her, and perhaps we will give to her after the meeting, just for time's sake. But I would like to actually stop here and perhaps give them both a thank you. for an excellent job that they have done for the journal. We also started the tradition 4 years ago of recognizing reviewers, and in 2018 we have the 7 outstanding reviewers. And what's striking about this list, if you look at it, it includes the junior and the senior faculty or professionals. It includes people from different countries. And it is a testimony to how the journal is viewed. So the contribution, not only from the authors, the senior authors, but you see contribution from the senior reviewers as well. And indeed, we are very grateful to such contribution. And again, that's one of the attributes that render this journal as successful as it is. So again, I would like to give a hand to outstanding reviewers of the journal. And now to the perhaps most exciting part of this presentation, the leadership transition. So I'm delighted to report that Rod Salgado have agreed to serve as a new editor-in-chief. And Catherine O'Sullivan from Imperial College has agreed to step in as an editor. I know Rod and I are delighted to see the appointment of the first female editor of the journal in the history of the journal. I think that we're very glad to see that, and very glad she accepted such a responsibility. Both Rod and Catherine are internationally recognized. Catherine will bring an excellent perspective internationally, as well as Rod, of course. And I'm confident that this journal will see new highs and will continue in the track of success. So I would like to stop again and welcome both Rod and Catherine to the new leadership role. And finally, note appreciation. All this work could not be possible without the publication, ASCE Publications, our colleague there, provide an excellent service, excellent support to make the journal as successful as it is. Not only this journal, but 34 journals of ASCE, and they have seen number of submissions just skyrocket, yet the level of support has maintained at the excellent level it has been so far. So we thank them very much, and we thank the authors, the reviewers, basically all of you sitting out there for making the journal as successful as it is. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your service to the industry and to the journal. We definitely appreciate that. Okay, for now, the purpose at hand this evening is the SEED lecture. I would like to take a second and recognize that we couldn't put on events like this without the support of sponsors. And the sponsor for the SEED lecture this evening is Jacobs. And I would like to invite Menzer Pelavan to come up and say a few words, please.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Kurt Bassnett. Good afternoon and early evening. Performance excellence is our commitment at Jacobs. Therefore, we are the proud sponsor of the 2019 H. Bolton Seed Award Lecture. We would like to take this opportunity to talk about our commitment to inclusion or diversity.
In 2018, we proudly add inclusion and diversity to our core foundational values. As a part of this initiative, we had 8 inclusion initiatives within the company. One of them was Jacobs Women's Network. Jacobs Women's Network now has over 5,000 members across 6 continents. We are aligning our focus with the United Nations Sustainable Development Programs 5, which is achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls, and Sustainable Development Goal 10, which is the reduce inequality within and among the countries. As a part of these 2 initiatives, we have several programs which focus on developing succession planning to empower and provide opportunities to women and in the leadership, and developing gender balance interview panels, and establishment of inclusion and diversity metrics for the senior leadership. Among all, one of the initiatives that we are most proud is the Men Advocating Real Change Leaders program, and we are proud to say that our CEO, Steve Dimitriou, was awarded Catalyzed Champions for Change, CEO Champions for Change, that is focusing on the support of workplaces that work for women. At Jacobs, we understand that people are the heart of our business, and allowing the change to be the best of, allowing them the chance to be the best of themselves starts with inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacobs, for your support of this lecture and of women in our profession and around the world. Thank you. At this moment, I'd like to introduce Greg Becker. Dr. Becker of the University of Maryland will introduce our award winner this evening.
What is that for?
I don't think you'll need that, but don't bring it up.
Okay. Good evening. It's my distinct pleasure this evening to introduce Dr. Alan Marr to present the 18th Bolton Seed Medal Lecture. There are many previous Seed lectures in the audience tonight. I saw a few as I walked in, which I think illustrates the prestige of this award and the importance of the remarks I think we're about to hear from Alan. I have two personal notes. On the first, I had the privilege myself of having had Professor Seed as a teacher at Berkeley in the mid-1960s. Some of you may know, as alumni of that period, or want to say, if you remember Berkeley in the 60s, you probably weren't there. But one remembers Professor Seed. He objected to us undergraduates bringing coffee into lecture, saying that coffee was never brought to professional meetings. I don't know what he thinks about the legalization, or would think about the legalization of marijuana, but it would be an interesting reaction. On the second and longer personal note, I've known Alan since only 2 years after I had Professor Seed as an instructor, and that's just shy of 50 years. Time goes by. He and I were flatmates in Cambridge, and collaborators in our early careers at MIT. I present the following pictures as evidence of what a career in soil mechanics can do. Oh, that's not the right picture. There it is. To one's hairline and to one's smoking habits. Alan, I think that's when we were both young professors at MIT. That's probably about 1975, I think. Alan's a child of North Carolina. He was raised, however, all over North America, trailing a father who worked in the tunneling business. Alan's now a member of the Moles, I might point out. He has 19 aunts and uncles and 5 siblings. The Marr family is a major cause of world population growth. Eventually, the family landed in California, and Alan, after attending 13 schools in 12 years, graduated from Oroville High School. I don't think he had anything to do with the recent spillway incident, but I'm not actually sure. He attended UC Davis as an undergraduate, and in 2007 was named a UC Davis Distinguished Engineering Alumnus. Alan entered MIT in 1970, and after a while gravitated to the sphere of Professor Lamb. And for perhaps 10 years after that, he was the technical soul of T.W. Lamb and Associates, which included many of the then MIT faculty and staff, including myself. My affiliation there and with him helped pay my first mortgage, for which I'm forever grateful. The path of entrepreneurialism is long and hard, but eventually led to the very successful Geocomp Corporation, of which Alan is the founder and CEO. He was elected to the National Academy of Engineering in 2008 for his innovative applications of numerical methods, risk analysis, advanced laboratory techniques, and field instrumentation to geotechnical engineering and construction. It is my deep and great pleasure to introduce Alan, my old friend, to deliver this year's SEED lecture.
I agree with all the words you said except the last one, old friend. Hopefully we're not there yet. It is really my great pleasure to be here and do this. I would like to thank those who are responsible for this honor. To me, it means a lot. It's a true honor to give this lecture. I actually met Professor Seed a number of times. Usually when he was invited to MIT by Professor Lamb to give a lecture, they were great friends and went back and forth with a great collaboration. I was always very impressed with Professor Seed's presentations. Very clear thinking, always. I always left the room thinking I really understood what he was talking about. I was fooled somewhat, usually, when I went to try to do some of that work, but clearly he knew what he was talking about. I gave a lot of thought to what I was going to, let's see here. I should have practiced this part. Here we go. Gave a lot of thought to what I was going to cover. My career, I've been very fortunate to work in a number of different aspects of geotechnical engineering, as Greg indicated there. But after a lot of thought, I kept coming back to something that troubled me from my early days at MIT teaching students, and I'll tell you why in a minute. The subject I chose was, what is judgment in geotechnical engineering? How do we get it? Yeah, how do we use it? Is it any good? And then also kind of what is risk in geotechnical engineering? Because I work in the risk area as well, and I realize that it's full of judgment too. And so somehow those two things might be coupled. Are geotechnical judgments and risk related? And how might we improve our geotechnical judgment and our assessments of risk? So that's, in short, what I will try to cover during this time. The thought history that led to this came, as I mentioned, early teaching. I taught a case study course with Professor Lamb at MIT, and we made them write reports like they were young budding engineers. And I was always struck by the number of times when a young student would go through a bunch of data that was usually conflicting. We'd give it to them, and they would try to absorb that and make some sense out of it, do a bunch of analyses usually, and try to impress us with their parametric studies and things, and come to the end with just confusion and saying, and then I used my engineering judgment. And I remember at that time marking up the papers saying, what do you mean? What is that? How did you get that? And tell me more what that judgment's all about. And that's always troubled me a bit, because as I went on and had young engineers working for me, I found many reports coming to me and saying, we did this and we have this conflicting information. Now we used our judgment and we conclude that you should make these piles such and such. What is that? And so it's always bothered me a little bit, and recently too, being in situations and litigations where we have multiple fine experts, all very well trained and schooled with great reputations, and yet we come to the opposite conclusion on something based on our judgments. What is that? Why is that happening? And so I wanted to use my time in preparing this lecture to explore this some more. And that's what I'm going to present to you tonight. Let's see here. Part of what drives this is the question of how good are our geotechnical judgments when we consider the large number of litigations going on that involve very large amounts of money and have geotechnical roots. And this lists some of the ones that I'm aware of. Most of them have been involved in one way. I chose the ones that have larger dollar signs. These are enormous numbers on projects where the fundamental root cause has some geotechnical tie. Should this be telling us something? Should this be telling us that we ought to be seriously looking at how we do geotechnical practice and try to improve on it in ways that we avoid or reduce these number of cases? I was in Brazil all last week, not working specifically on this, but working on tailings dams and some other issues in Brazil. This is the Brumadinho tailings dam that failed on January 25th and has killed so far that we know 209, and with 100 still missing. Damages may well exceed $10 billion. That's a total guess. The government alone has threatened a $13 billion litigation fine. This is amazing in that this failure, there is a video, by the way, online. Go search for Brumadinho video, and you can look at this yourself. It is phenomenal. This failure started with no prior evidence, and from within 10 seconds, developed into what you see here with, with a scarp. I've tried to outline there, and with this area punching out, with a toe heaving out. This will turn out to be a major insight to us in geotechnical engineering once the cause of this is determined. The real concern here is that this tailings dam was essentially stopped 3 years ago, was closed out. It sat there. Why did it fail 3 years later? Interesting question. And one clearly with geotechnical issues at the very root. So let's get into geotechnical judgment. I wrote a paper in 2006 on this, talking about how geotechnical engineering itself is really quite unique in that it requires a lot of judgment. And why is that? And you don't read all the words on here. The key thing is we go through a process in geotechnical engineering where we have to characterize sites with a lot of conflicting information, with a lot of test data that may have gaps in it, holes. We're always searching and asking for more information. And then we try to analyze all that to come up with some conceptual model of what our site is made about and how it's going to behave. And you'll notice there I've highlighted the words here. What you need to read off this slide is the occurrence of judgment in every one of these steps. Design phase, we apply judgment. Again, in order for us to make calculations, in order for us to look at the results of the calculations and make sense out of them. And then we do a design, we go build it, we drop into the observation phase where we observe what's really going on, how is it comparing to what we thought would happen when we did the design, and then we again apply judgment. What does this mean? If it's behaving differently, what in our judgment should we do? Should we take precautionary moves, modify something? You can see this whole process of geotechnical engineering that we do involves judgment in every phase. Part of this, I think I've learned too, is because we're very non-codified in what we do. You look at our structural brothers and sisters, it's pretty much code. There's not a lot of room left in their activities for judgment. We don't have codes. We don't have necessarily that many standards. So we have to figure these things out as we go along and make decisions, make judgments, and part of that is that is partly what makes geotechnical engineering so much fun and such a challenge. Let's see here. Let's look at it, make sure I get, so the question here is, what is engineering judgment? We all use it. What is it? How do we get it? Is it any good? Is our knowledge of it sufficient, and could we improve on it? And do we rely on it and trust it too much? Let's look at an example. And this goes back to Greg and my days at MIT, actually, when us and our colleagues got involved in this major test embankment. Professor Lamb has full credit for this. He talked a funding agency into the idea of, hey, let's do this, let's take this embankment, which was already existing, 40-foot high embankment on soft clay, and let's load it to failure. And we'll invite a bunch of experts to come in and calculate or tell us, predict how much extra fill we can put on this existing embankment to cause a foundation stability failure. That was really pretty darn interesting and pretty clear thinking there. My job was to make this happen and make sure it failed. That's a kind of risky undertaking if any of you have tried to conduct field tests. I believe it was 9 well-known engineers agreed to make predictions ahead of time and then turn those in. Professor Peck was a referee, and we put instruments in it so we could measure what was going on, and we began the exercise of loading it. We kept all of the results secret until we had a symposium at MIT, and we brought in, I think we had 200 or 300 people attended this, and it was really quite an interesting undertaking. We had a lot. This was unusual in that we had a lot of data. This embankment had already been subjected to a lot of research. It was the original piece of I-95 that was going to come down through Boston, and then the road got canceled. And so this segment presented a very great opportunity for a research program without costing a lot of additional money. So there was a lot of lab data, a lot of field data with things like field veins, a lot of field measurements made on the first behavior of the first 40 feet. All that was provided to these engineers to make their predictions. And predictions are really kind of what we do in geotechnical engineering. And this shows a summation of the results from those. The axis on the y side, I'm sorry, is a little small, but every division is 5 feet. So that y-axis runs from 0 to 30 feet. And it's interesting, you'll see that the little dot indicates the predicted height at which it would fail, and then we ask them to give us a range on those. The mean value predicted by people of fill required to make this fail varied from 9 feet to 27 feet. So one engineer said, add 9 more feet, so for a total of 49. Another engineer said, add 27 feet. That's a pretty big range in mean results. And the extreme on their ranges went everywhere from 6 to 30 feet. Now, this is really quite remarkable, and when we reveal this, nobody yet knows the answers, and we did, but we kept it quiet. This is a photograph taken after the failure. We were successful in loading it. We loaded a length 300 feet long, and it failed. We had estimated, I remember sitting in Cambridge in one of the little dim bars up the street on a Saturday afternoon with my team here. We had to figure out how much fill to put on this thing because we had to get a contractor engaged to do it. In the back of an envelope, I sketched off 18 feet. I didn't keep it, unfortunately, so I can't prove it to you. It failed at 18.7 feet, and I'll show you that in a minute. But the real surprise on this slide, we loaded 300 feet. It failed 1,300 feet long. That shows the top of what had been the fill area, and you see it running all the way from here. Here's the loaded area. It's running all the way from back here down through here and about 300 feet to this side. Furthermore, we had loaded it in a way where I was trying to force it to fail to the east. It failed to both sides. So I would argue, and we had almost no warning that this would occur. My team drove by on this road at 7 o'clock in the morning to get ready to go to work. They had to go up here, make a U-turn, and come back. They drove by at 7 o'clock. At 7:02, they were back here, and it had failed. That's remarkable. These are surprises, things we wouldn't expect. These are things where I think our judgments are good and bad. We said it was going to take 18 feet, but we never in our imagination thought that this would fail for 1,300 feet long. And thank God there was nothing on either side of this that we damaged by this activity. Very interesting. So here's those predictions again, and here is where the actual number settled in at 18.7 feet. Now the interesting part of that is something our statistical friends know. If you take a bunch of people and you ask them to do this exercise and then you take the average of what they give you, it usually works out pretty darn good. Unfortunately, we can't afford to pay all these people every design job we have, but that's really pretty remarkable. The right side of that is an exercise in which they also, after these people had made their predictions, they asked the experts in the audience to give their estimates based on what they'd heard and seen of what they thought the answer would be. And it's pretty interesting. that if you take the mean kind of what they had, it was pretty similar to the experts, and the range was pretty similar to the experts too. Again, kind of the law of you get a number of opinions and average them out, and it works out pretty good. But I think it does say, though, that we have considerable difficulty in making accurate geotechnical predictions. And predictions are at the heart of what we do. So this means we have considerable difficulty making accurate judgments and that underpin the designs that we do. So what does all this take me? You know, how do I get anywhere on this? So I happen to have remembered that Professor Peck was a guru and recognized as a guru on judgment and engineering judgment. And so I went looking to what he'd done to tell us what we should be doing to improve on this. And of his 226 papers, 5 of them specifically talked about engineering judgment. He was also given a Distinguished Service Award by the Deep Foundation Institute in recognition of his exceptional judgment in geotechnical problems. So I think we can trust what he had to say. There is an excellent video that he was asked to do on engineering judgment, specifically on that. And if you haven't watched that video and you're interested in this subject, go watch it. It's just really wonderful in his usual slow-voiced, well-paced self, getting across his thoughts about this. And one of the really surprising things that I saw in that video was this statement: everybody agrees that an engineer should have good judgment. I'm not sure how to define what judgment is. That was really surprising to me. So I'm looking for help here, and he's admitting that he's having a little trouble with this judgment thing. Well, if you go look at that in careful detail, I've watched it several times. It involves, and I've tried to summarize it here on a couple of slides, a sense of proportion, a sense of fitness. Does the answer make sense kind of thing? The right order of magnitude. And this is really important. I find a lot of our young engineers, you know, they come out with a finite element calculation that tells me how much something's going to move. They have no sense of whether that answer is right or not. I remember one engineer coming to me with a tunnel arch settling 12 inches. And I knew that was wrong. It had to be something like 1 or 2 inches. So he looked at me puzzled. He went back and he came back sheepishly an hour later. Yeah, I put the modulus in with a decimal place in the wrong place, right? That's the sense of proportion. Ability to select and solve the right problem. I mean, this is increasingly, I see some of our younger engineers, they just don't stop to think. They rush right to a spreadsheet somehow or other and solve the wrong problem. The ability to establish reasonable criteria. Professor Peck gives some excellent examples on that, but this is the case where, you know, someone comes along and says I see this in some of our deep excavations. The criteria says the building next door to this deep station excavation cannot be allowed to settle more than 1/4 of an inch. That's nonsense, but that's what the people said we had to do. I had a case in New York like that where the building actually settled 3.5 inches before we were done with that deep station excavation. So having reasonable criteria is really important. A basis for judgment, Professor Peck talked about empiricism and theory. And I think there's more to that I'll get into here in a little bit. What has worked in the past, also what's not worked. And a need, we occasionally, in empiricism, we face a need to push boundaries so we can do something new, but we have to be careful that we don't go where we haven't been before and induce a safety problem. Theory, I thought it was very interesting for him to say it provides a basis for getting a feel for things and to tell us relationships amongst the important parameters of a problem. But at the end, along in this section, I heard him say on the video, I don't make theoretical calculations very often. How many of our young engineers could say, that's my mantra? I don't make calculations very often. Of course, you know, Professor Peck had been around a long time, and he usually was reviewing the work of others, so that's kind of understanding. But I think that is a useful thing for us to remember. A couple other things that he said: how to develop engineering judgment. He gave some suggestions on how we might do that. A lot of it has to do with getting a good education, keeping up with the literature, getting a variety of training and experience in early years, change jobs as necessary, and keep a notebook. Notebooks, I don't know if you've noticed, but I get on our young engineers. They'll come into a conference room to start working on a project. Nobody's got a notebook. Why? Why is this? Or half of them will come in with their phones and are sitting there doing email all during the meeting. Writing down stuff, I find, is a way to help me think and organize. And so I was very curious to see that Professor Peck was pointing out the importance of that. In teaching engineering judgment, he talked about the importance of the classroom experience, and those of you who know what they did a lot with case studies at Illinois. And then in apprenticeships, trying to participate in meetings and site visits as often as possible and study the lives and biographies of other engineers. Really great, great advice. I went to look past Professor Peck for a few things to see, and I thought this was quite interesting. A statement by Samuel Johnson, judgment is forced on us by our experience. Judgment is forced on us by our experiences. And then Mark Twain, good judgment is the result of experience, and experience is the result of bad judgment. Yeah, we learn, we get better by mistakes. And I like to think of it, I learn and get better by the mistakes of others. Will Rogers once said, good judgment comes from experience, and a lot of that comes from bad judgment. I think Will was kind of copying Mark Twain on that one. There's a contrarian view of geotechnical judgment captured very well by Steve Vick in a book called Degrees of Belief. And if you don't know this book and you do anything with subjective probability, you should read this book multiple times. It's a wonderful history of probability, how we got where we are, and how to use subjective probability. But he says, kind of tongue-in-cheek, judgment, geotechnical judgment, is a geotechnical metaphysics of sorts, ill-defined, unreliable, and possessed by those of a certain age. Us bald, gray guys. He also said, oh, I'm sorry, you're getting behind here. He also said, the last refuge of the analytically inept. That was saying that, if I'm not theoretical, I can't analyze, I just back up and say, well, I used my judgment, right? And then little more than guesswork and a flimsy substitute for logic and reasoning. Now, Steve wasn't, as I said, this is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but there is some view that says that the judgment is to be looked on with some suspicion. So I went looking to see what Professor Seed might have said about this subject, and it seems he didn't say very much about it at all. And in fact, I looked through all of his publications, not a single one of them mentioned the word judgment. Now, he might have said something inside the publication, but I didn't go that deep. I talked to a few of his former students. They couldn't remember him saying very much directly about engineering judgment in class, but it's clear he had a lot of it. And I'm sorry, this is very small print here, but I contacted Steve Kramer, Professor Kramer, who was last year's Seed lecturer, and he sent me an email which I thought would just be something you all would appreciate, and I'll read it here because Professor Kramer, my greatest impression of Professor Seed's judgment has developed over the course of my career as a researcher. In many aspects of geotechnical earthquake engineering, and particularly in the area of liquefaction, we are still using the same basic principles he laid out some 50 years ago. They were rooted in fundamentals, but also showed insight and judgment that has endured, particularly remarkable given the tools he had at that time, i.e. no computers, no finite element analysis, no visualization, no digital data acquisition or control in the lab, no journals or reference materials at his fingertips, et cetera, et cetera. I have, for example, spent a lot of time trying to come up with something better than cyclic stress ratio, something based on PGA or magnitude, for instance, and characterizing earthquake loading and liquefaction triggering analyses. Everything I come up with so far, as logical as they seem, falls short of what Professor Seed judged to be appropriate 50 years ago. It's pretty damn frustrating, but it also illustrates his great judgment in earthquake engineering. What a nice statement, huh? And a nice way to recognize Professor Seed and his great contributions. I did have a couple of people tell me the only thing he remembered, they remembered from Professor Seed was that he loved to quote Roger Bacon. And one of them actually had found a thing with Professor Seed's writing on it, sending to him what this Bacon quote was. There are two modes of acquiring knowledge, namely by reasoning and by experience. Reasoning draws a conclusion and makes us grant that conclusion, but it does not make this conclusion certain, nor does it remove doubt so that the mind may rest on the intuition of truth, unless the mind discovers that by the path, unless the mind discovers it by the path of experience. So I think we can take from that Professor Seed's getting across the message, experience is one of the key things for us to be successful in using our judgment. And I want to thank Scott Anderson and Professor Boulanger for that insight about Professor Seed. So there's another view, too, that good judgment is just good common sense. And so I got a couple of things here. One, Professor Peck said in 1961, designing an earth dam requires good judgment. But he also said good judgment is equal to good common sense. Oh, that sounds interesting, because I grew up on a farm, and I know that a good farmer has lots of good common sense. So can a good farmer design a safe earth dam? Interesting question. What does that reveal for us? Why am I wasting your time on that? It's to make the point that common sense must be in the area in which we are exercising our judgment. I would not go do what my good close partner does, brain surgery, because I have no experience and knowledge in that. And so this common sense really is very appropriate, but it's got to be in the area that you're rendering the judgment on. So let's go on a little bit more. How good is our judgment today? I am working on, or was working on, a case in Los Angeles, 65-foot deep station for the new Crenshaw line. It's top-down construction, big concern about what the settlements outside the excavation support system might be. The design engineer predicted that those would be about, why did I lose this? I don't think that's me. Yeah, there we go. Design engineer predicted that the ground outside the excavation would settle about 1 inch. That's common, actually. The excavation support system moves in, the groundwater goes down, settlements and whatever combine to result in these settlements and potentially harm buildings. We were charged with making measurements of what those settlements might be at many points outside the excavation. And the scale on this graph is that the upward y-axis is heave. And the division there is 0.2 of an inch between the marks. So the graph runs from minus 0.6 of an inch at the top, which is heave, to plus 6 inches at the bottom. That excavation is heaving, or the soil outside that excavation is heaving. And this caused unbelievable amounts of consternation. Remember, the design engineer predicted 1 inch of settlement. It's heaving. How good are we? Did he make an error in his calculations? I know that's to be found sometimes. No, this was truly I saw his final analyses. He had it going down 1 inch. Well, this was the bottom of the excavation. We continued on with it. You'll see that right after we finished and we started building back in, the ground started settling again outside. It did what we expect. Why is it heaving? It's a huge, massive unloading with a very stiff excavation support system. Right? So somebody totally misjudged what was happening in this case, and they miscalculated. But those calculations were impacted by the judgments and decisions they made and how they set up their model. Right? So this is not the only time I see these kinds of contradictions and surprises. So definition of judgment, the ability to make considered decisions and come to sensible conclusions. It's ability to take a lot of information, organize it, and draw some conclusions out of it that you should then be able to support. You should be able to argue and convince someone else that you've come to the right conclusion and that your judgment is sound. There has been a lot of work. Let's go look a little bit at psychologists and cognitive thinking people. A lot of work done on what it is, how we think, and how we come to drawing judgments. And it turns out that if you look at the development of thinking, it's fairly recent. It's only in the last 100,000 years that animal life has evolved to the point that we have these things called reasoning and ability to do calculation with symbols. And until we can get to those things, we really, as the animal world, really had no way of arriving at conclusions and drawing judgments. So it's this reasoning and calculating that really are critical to our ability to come to judgments. And it's really, these are called the core elements of critical thinking. And if you have any kids in school, they talk a lot these days about developing critical thinking skills in children, something we don't necessarily do very well. Now, the key thing on this slide is just the 5 things listed on the left side, 5 or 6, 6 things. These are the elements of critical thinking. Being able to interpret things, and notice what I've got a detailed description there, but it has the word judgment in it. This is coming out of psychology people, not me. There's analysis involved in the brain, again, involves judgment. Evaluation in the brain involves judgment. Inference involves judgment. Explanation involves judgment. Self-regulation, another key thing of the human brain is our ability to self-regulate and self-reflect on things. Is that the right answer? How does that feel? These are unique to the human being brain and our ability to arrive at, do critical thinking and arrive at a conclusion. There are qualities of good critical thinkers that these people write about. I pulled some of these out of papers over the years. I won't go through all these. I intend to write a full paper on all this, so it'll have more descriptions of all these, but I'll pick out a few key words: clarity, reasonableness, inquisitiveness, alertness, self-confidence, flexibility, fair-mindedness, honesty, and a willingness to reconsider things and change your mind if new evidence proves that you might have drawn the wrong conclusion. I kind of got up with this little diagram of how engineers might view this process of the judgment continuum. We start on the left with a universe of facts. They have a lot of stuff, maybe related and not related, some of it false facts. We got to sort through all that to develop data that we can believe in, trust in, models that reflect what's important in that world. Mental images, because we work a lot and construct a lot in our brain on these mental images of the problem we're trying to solve. We evaluate all this, we come to some judgment, draw some conclusions, make some recommendations, and then we're faced with reality. And the reality involves observations, measurements, and criticisms, feedback. Feedback that we take back into thinking about how do we get to that conclusion, what did we do wrong, what do we need to change next time. That whole process of that feedback and evaluating is really critical to improving our judgment process. And if you read what people write about improving judgment, if you don't have the feedback, you're going to keep making the same mistake over and over again. And think about how much of the work we do in geotechnical engineering where now we make recommendations, but we're severed from design. We're severed from construction. We don't get that feedback anymore. You've designed 20 spread footing foundations, all doing the same thing, and you never know what the outcome was, right? So that's really a setback that we've encountered in geotechnical engineering, where we get separated so much from the construction, and we just don't know. I find that very unsatisfying when I'm on a project like that. So some factors that influence judgment, I'm not going to go through all these, but the point of this slide is the way our brain works. There are lots of things that screw up our judgment. And this is just a list of some of them. We have a tendency as humans to be overconfident, for example, when we make estimates of probabilities. We have some of these things like availability, which means we tend to remember the most recent thing in the mind and we forget older things. So our assessment of the likelihood of stuff gets all screwed up. One of the interesting things I observed in some of this work was the importance of stress on making judgments. Now remember the rule, if you got an important decision to make, sleep on it. You know, that's pretty good, interesting thing about making a judgment. Don't make it harsh and rash and quick. There are lots of things that lead to defective judgment. And this lists some of them: missing data, irrelevant data, defective data, unwarranted assumptions, poor checking, bad mood, irrational thinking, incorrect probabilistic thinking. And one of the themes out of this is, and folks like Professor Becker can speak eloquently on this kind of stuff, is that generally human beings are poor at probability. Even those who think they know what probability is violate some basic rules of probability. And that comes along to affect our judgments in bad ways a lot of times. So some good judgment characteristics: being able to orient and focus, using good information gathering skills, systematically weighing information and thinking things through, maintaining freedom of thought and trying to minimize one's biases, deliberating, deciding, then deliberating some more. That's the reflective thought part. Come to a decision, test that it's right, and then considering its logical consistency, ethics, stakeholder impacts, and consequences. That's a mouthful. But thinking about our judgments and what are the potential impacts if we're wrong. Learning from experience. Let me just skip this one. Talk a little bit about an example of how judgment can be so important. I was invited to assist on the investigation into the failures at Katrina, particularly the lower Ninth Ward. And there had been several studies before we got involved that had come to conclusions as to why this particular segment of the eye wall had failed. And I was a part of it as an expert on a legal team involving a lawsuit that was that $60 billion thing I put up on that third slide that I showed. That was one estimate, if this lawsuit was lost, of what it would cost the U.S. Treasury out of the lawsuit. And so in looking at this, there had been several well-written explanations of what had gone on, that it had just been overtopped and failed. That was one prominent explanation, but that didn't fit well with some witness observations and testimony. And key among that was that a witness who was at this, sorry, I learned this maybe. He was standing here in this doorway, watching as water was starting to flow over the top of the eye wall that's here. This part of the eye wall is missing. And he heard a loud sound, and then he saw what he described as like a missing tooth in the wall, right in this section. And at first they thought something had hit it and broke the wall, but nobody ever really put all that together. And as we came along and was looking into this, it kept coming back to me, what is the explanation for these two pieces of evidence? And as I got to thinking about it more, and as our geotechnical guys were analyzing it, in the lower right-hand screen, you'll see there's a wall that is higher than the one next to it. This is an illustration trying to show. These walls sit on top of sheet piles driven deep into the subsurface. This section had been built later than this section. It was stronger, it was stiffer, it was higher. And as we started analyzing this, we realized that this section here, running down this way, was going to move laterally more than the stiffer neighbor. It was going to shift horizontally more. Now, realize that this has a sheet pile wall in it with a zigzag pattern. What happens at that intersection? I'm now moving one next to the other. What happens to the sheeting? It gets stressed along its longitudinal axis. It was never designed like that, to behave that way. The concrete portion of the wall that sticks up, you can see here, there was another piece just like it. That concrete portion was laying over the top of the sheeting. So as the sheeting starts to stretch, it stretches the concrete in the horizontal direction. It was never designed to withstand that failure mode. And so what happened is it almost instantly went into tension. That's what this is. This is the top of the wall. This is trying to illustrate the sheeting here getting pulled out in the direction of the red arrows and causing tension here. The concrete snapped. That's the explosive sound. It fell away. That's the gap that he saw. Water poured through here and failed the wall. Now, why do I say this? Someone had used judgment to come to other causal explanations. We had used judgment, but we had gone much farther into incorporating all of the observations and facts to come to a quite different opinion. This is important to us. Make sure we're observing and collecting and explaining all the important information when we arrive at our judgments. So, and part of what I've been talking about here, trying to talk about, is that we do a lot of things in geotechnical engineering that involve uncertainties. And uncertainties, for those of us who work in the risk world, uncertainty creates risk. By making judgments to bridge our gaps in data, information, and knowledge, we are inherently making subjective assessments of the importance of various uncertainties in our decisions and recommendations. Our mind actually has a judgment machine that works on a subconscious level to weigh these uncertainties and assess potential consequences of the outcomes of our decisions and recommendations. Those judgments and decisions are the product of our mind's inherent subjective probabilistic assessments. So those of you who don't believe in subjective probability, I'm sorry, your brain is using it all the time, and you can never shut it down. But our brain takes shortcuts, and it can be wrong, and in fact is many times. Excuse me a second, I just got to get some water here. Judgment is subjective and can be flawed, and I've listed a number of things. Well, part of what we do here is a little bit of a credit to Professor Lamb, talking about prediction is at the heart of civil engineering. It's hard due to all the many unknowns, and it involves a lot of judgment to bridge over the many unknowns. Hence, prediction is a risky business. And as Lord Robbins once said, prediction is a fool's game. And yet, it is a key part of what is at the heart of geotechnical engineering. Professor Lamb, one of his last slides, and I had to pull this in and show it. He gave a Casa Grande lecture at BSCE, and those of you who remember him know that he had these type A, B, and C predictions. A was the result is not known. You're really truly predicting before the event. B was during the event. C is afterwards, like a hindcast. And of course, we're all accurate on hindcasts, right? We get it perfectly right. But he came up with a new one in the Casa Grande lecture. He called it his X prediction, one in which there's little basis for the prediction. It's basically just a guess, and it's of very little value to anybody. And I just put onto the side here for interest, you know, the amount of judgment that's required and when we're making these different types of predictions. You know, type A ahead of time requires a lot of judgment, whereas a type X really requires little to no judgment. It's just guesswork. It's important to think of these things and how when we're doing type A type predictions, there's just a lot of things that can be unknown and go wrong. And to bring us to this whole question of knowns and unknowns, Rumsfeld in his famous statement of there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. Many of you know these things. But there are a couple of others that I've noticed and picked up too in some of my own work in risk assessment, something that I called the misknowns, the things we overlook. You know, we can sit in meetings for 2 or 3 days doing a detailed risk register and layout and discover we've missed something. And that's always a very concerning thing to me. And then there's something called the unknown knowns, where we might intentionally refuse to acknowledge something that we know, but we don't want to deal with it. kind of interesting twist on those thoughts of Rumsfeld and adding to it. And then I found this other twist on it, a 13th century Persian poet. There are 4 types of men, and think of my last slide. One who knows and knows what he knows, his horse of wisdom will reach the skies. And I knew my friend Professor Idris would love this statement. You probably quote this, right? One who knows but doesn't know that he knows. He is fast asleep, so you should wake him up. One who doesn't know but knows that he doesn't know, his limping mule will eventually get him home. And one who doesn't know and doesn't know that he doesn't know, he will eternally be lost in hopeless oblivion. You know, so Rumsfeld actually just put it in a little bit better words, right? Risk is a 4-letter word. It's something that can really bring us destruction and lots of problems, cost us a lot of money, and particularly in geotechnical engineering and construction, risk results a lot from the decision making we have to do in the judgment we use. Risk has 2 elements, threats and opportunities. We sometimes forget about the opportunity side of it, but in assessing any of these, it's a lot about making best estimates, dealing with a lot of uncertainty. And so it's really all about judgment. Hence, going back to the title of my presentation, judgment and risk. These 2 things are very closely tied together. Risk assessment is a tool that has been used in some parts of or in large parts of the world to provide a way to quantify the uncertainty in our judgments and decisions, a way to communicate the degree of uncertainty we have in these to others. And unfortunately, I think it's well developed in some disciplines within geotechnical engineering, but not as widely used as it could be. Our friends in tunneling, for example, have developed the concept of risk registers really quite well, but I don't see it broadly transferred to foundation engineering. And yet I feel there's a lot of benefits that could come from doing that. Here's just a definition of risk. You know, it's probability of something going wrong times the consequence of it going wrong. Realize both of those are kind of uncertain, right? We're making estimates. It's about the future. We're trying to project and predict what is the likelihood of something happening, and if it happens, what is the consequence. Risk management is a systematic process of trying to identify, analyze, plan, monitor, communicate, and manage that risk. And there's a very nice business to be had by developing great risk management skills. I realized some years ago that a lot of the work that was being done in risk management, though, was being done at the front end of the project. I do a risk assessment, write a nice report at the front end of the project, and it sits on the desk. Were you motioning something? Oh, I thought you were telling me some time signaler. My clock is not on here, so I'm not exactly sure where I'm at in time. Where am I? 6:20? Oh, geez. You were right, and I went too slowly. Let me just think here a little bit. The active risk management was realizing that to really manage something, you have to stay active throughout the life of the project. So do risk management and review it as you go along, because your judgments are going to prove to be wrong and you have to update those. And there's some nice tools for doing that, which is called here's an example of a risk register, where you try to lay out what are the risks, what's the likelihood of their occurrence, what's the consequences if they occur, who owns that risk, what's an indicator of an emerging risk, and then what's the potential risk mitigation factor. This is a very useful tool, and if you're not familiar with this, I urge you to start to use them, because it can be a great way for you to help manage these uncertainties. There's another one called a heat map for qualitative. You're not really putting numbers on it, but you're trying to rank things. In the interest of time, I'll skip that. I want to come to one key point, though, and that is that there's some probability tools that we don't use as well as we could that can help in this whole area of uncertainty and its characterization. This is a graph on the left side of depth along the y-axis and strength of soil measured across the x-axis. And there are a bunch of data points which you can see. I drew on there some lines showing the mean and 1, 2, 3 standard deviations. And we've got this one data point that lies way over to the right, to the left side. Weak material. Is that a real data point? Or is that bad data? Is that a weak layer? What should I do with that? And this is always a problem that challenges us in geotechnical engineering. So I go out and I do another boring. And I get this kind of thing. What does that tell me? Do I have a weak layer? Yeah, judgment would start telling me, but how do I explain that to someone else? And it's always, I've wondered, how do we use statistics and probability to help us make this decision? Is that likely to be a weak layer or not? So someone like Professor Becker will quickly tell you, oh, there's great tools for doing this. It's called Bayes' theorem. And Bayes' theorem allows you a way in which you can take information and update your prior estimates. And so just to quickly show, even if I had no information, that is, before I do anything, the second boring, it's equally likely that that's a weak layer or not a weak layer. So it's a 50-50 proposition. I do a second boring, and it takes the likelihood that that weak layer is there from 50-50 up to about 90%. That's really interesting. I can show somebody now that I've got a basis for drawing my judgment. And if I drew a third boring and that weak layer shows up, it's almost 100% sure that now, that low value shows up, almost 100% sure that that is a weak layer. At least from a judgmental standpoint, I'm safe to proceed as though that was a weak layer. Our estimates of probability are frequently flawed. And I'm not going to go through these, but I just wanted to list all the things that people have defined as screwing up our brain's ability to estimate subjective probabilities. There's a lot of them there, and that's kind of scary. And that was the whole purpose of this slide, to tell you, be careful. There's lots of things that mess with our brain. And so that led people like Professor Duncan to give us some cautionary statements. Judgment is needed in probabilistic analyses for the same reasons judgment is used and needed in deterministic studies. And because there's also a number of methods of performing probabilistic analyses that will produce different results, we have no choice but to wind up using judgment even in the probability world. The probability of failure should be considered to be a range of values rather than a single precise number. Again, judgment coming to play over in the probability world. And then they also quoted from Professor Peck on a question of how probability of failure values should be presented. He replied, I would disabuse myself of the idea of reporting a probability of failure to 3 significant figures, especially as the exponent itself might even be in question. And I see this a fair amount. What am I driving at here? We are constantly dealing with uncertainties. We're constantly having to deal with probabilities, and they are numbers that you have to be very cautious with. I've already made this point pretty much but this is some of the reasons why we have to be cautious. We have difficulty thinking in probabilistic terms. We tend to underestimate consequences and make mistakes with probability. Typically, if we're trying to do something new, like innovative solutions, they tend to hide a lot of uncertainty, so we ought to be especially cautious when we're working and trying to push that envelope out there. And then one of the issues I thought was quite interesting is non-experts in today's world may feel that their judgments are just as valid as those of experts. How many times have you been in a room where someone who is coming more from a management field has just as strong an opinion about a technical issue as you do? I find that really, really quite interesting. So I come towards the end here now of how can we improve on judgment. And so some of the suggestions on this is building on what I opened with Professor Peck. Expand your body of evaluated experience. The more experiences you have, and maybe that's why gray-haired old men are pretty good at this stuff, and increasingly gray-haired older women. Develop a logical and orderly thought process by practicing objective estimates of the situation. That was Professor Peck's sense of proportion. Be well-grounded in theoretical bases of models and their limitations. Have simple methods to check and gain a sense of proportion. Identify and understand the gaps in your knowledge and data and their implications to your judgments. Again, judgment's a lot about missing information and hence risk. Avoid impulsive decisions. View the situation from many different perspectives and rethink things and think about unintended consequences. And then consider the effects of your decisions on all the stakeholders. We're too narrow sometimes. Employees, customers, stakeholders, family, reputation. We don't think about that poor designer of the dam in Brazil. So, oh, I finally got some time here. I'm almost done. Let's see. Let me skip through that one because... So, summary. Just to review some of the things I've tried to put across, we develop good judgment skills from personal evaluated experiences. Not just experience, but personal evaluated experience. Many of our judgments are defective because of inherent flaws in how our thinking processes work. That thinking involves subjective probabilistic thinking, and it doesn't use all the available information, and it may be flawed. The consequences of flawed judgment can be very significant and larger than we typically can imagine. We tend to underestimate risk in many instances due to overconfidence and a number of other things that are deficiencies in the way our brain works with probability. Test the underlying premises for our judgments and explore the sensitivity of outcomes to understand how things could go wrong so you could be better prepared to deal with them or else change what you're doing so that you minimize bad outcomes. The best way to improve our judgment is through evaluation of outcomes of our decisions and recommendations and actually track those through measurements, observations, and feedback. So I hoped in this lecture that I've been able to open your mind a little bit. Sorry, I got behind on that part. For those of you who are students, that you will apply the points of this lecture and develop your judgment skills faster. Judgment's so critical. It's even more so today with all the information that's coming at you. Even in the world of artificial intelligence, it ain't too good at judgment. Nowhere near like what engineers are, skilled engineers are. To those of you who are professors and teachers, I would hope that I've inspired you a little bit to address judgment in classroom and its limitations with your students in how you teach, and to help students appreciate the proper role of judgment and to develop better judgment skills all lifelong. To young engineers, I would hope you would remember and apply the methods to continuously improve your engineering judgment skills throughout your career. And to practitioners, I hope you will become more explicit in the assumptions, limitations, and risks of your judgments and explain them to your clients. The clients should be making the decisions ultimately, where it's their money and it's their project. And so we have a job to make sure they understand where we're making judgments and where are the risks. And then to mentor your younger staff to develop stronger judgment skills and to understand the power and limitations of engineering judgment. And finally, parting words from that great general: the winning general is the one who can best act on imperfect information and half-formed theories. I think that is the one who can use good judgment. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much and appreciate your attention. It's been my joy to do this, and I do plan to write a paper that will cover all of this stuff that it had in small print in much more detail. So, thank you. Thanks very much.
Well, I can't think of a better way to kick off a conference on case histories than Dr. Marr's talk. I'd also like to mention he is the first practitioner to be awarded the Harry Seed Medal. So congratulations again. Thank you for that very enlightening lecture. I've got a long list of announcements, so I'll try to go through them quickly that Brad left behind for me today. First off, if you didn't sign up for the special event tomorrow night, please stop by the registration desk or right beside the registration desk and grab one of the tickets. It's completely free, but we'd like you to go if you grab a ticket. Secondly, the conference officially begins tomorrow. We have former Governor Ed Rendell from Pennsylvania, the first of our 4 GeoPit talks, and a special video that you definitely want to see tomorrow. It should be a lot of fun. Our first poster session is tomorrow afternoon at 3:30 in the exhibit hall. Stop by and see some exciting research because, of course, there are only so many podium slots, and we've got a lot of people who want to tell you about their exciting research going on or their exciting case histories here today. The Outreach and Engagement Committee Happy Hour is Monday from 4:30 to 6:30 at the Field House at 1150 Filbert Street between the Lowe's and the Convention Center. I hope you got all that address information. Please join us for a networking event and have an adult beverage with us. If you haven't done so yet, please download the conference app. It's easy, has a lot of good information on there. It's called Attendify. Just check the first page of the program and take a picture of the little code there and you can download the app pretty easily. PDH forms, if you are here to continue our education through case histories, they're available at the registration desk, but scan your badge when you enter the sessions and you'll get an email in 4 weeks to verify your hours. Proceedings instructions are available with the packet that you should have got at registration. Make sure to download those in the next 60 days, if not today, to start looking at these papers. The student competitions are tomorrow in the exhibit hall from 10 o'clock until 3 o'clock, and if you've never seen these before, these are really exciting, a lot of fun. I encourage you to go to this. And if you're still there in the exhibit hall, stop by the ASCE booth and make a contribution to help us keep these student activities going. They're a lot of fun, and we're preparing our next generation of geotechnical engineers. Lastly, tonight, join me downstairs in the exhibit hall for the opening reception, and please start saying thank you to our sponsors and exhibitors. So with that, I close our opening day and hope to see you downstairs.